When Steward Denethor died and his successor, Faramir, was incapacitated due to his injuries suffered during the retreat to Minas Tirith, leadership of Gondor fell into the hands of Prince Imrahil, the Prince of Dol Amroth. Behind the stewards, the Princes of Dol Amroth were the most important nobles in Gondor, ruling from their powerful seat in Dol Amroth and having a family history that almost rivaled that of the line of Elendil. So in this video, we look at the legendary House of Dol Amroth. Although the list of the Princes of Dol Amroth seemingly only goes back to Galador, who was born in the 21st century of the Third Age, in reality the history of Dol Amroth goes far back into the Second Age. Following the War of the Elves and Sauron in the late 17th century of the Second Age, the Númenóreans began to colonize Middle-earth in larger numbers, soon founding major cities such as Pelargir and Umbar. Sometime before the year 2221, one family settled on the coast of the land between the mouths of the River Kearney and the River Morthond. Although we don't know its name at the time, this land would later be called Belfalas or Dor en Ernil, the land of the prince, and upon a small promontory, this family would have their main settlement, the same one which would eventually be called Dol Amroth. But this family wasn't just any random family. They were in fact related to the lands of Andúnier, who were a cadet branch of the House of Elros. So the lords of this land were related to both the kings of Númenor and eventually both the kings of Arnor and Gondor. Although this family left Númenor before the Númenóreans split into the King's Men and the Faithful, they were undoubtedly closer to the latter and lived in close proximity to the elves who lived in Ethelond. An interesting quirk that this family retained was their use of Adunaic, even after it fell out of fashion with the Faithful and later Dunedain. The reason for this is that they didn't associate Adunaic with the darkness of the King's Men, because, after all, they left Númenor before the King's Men became a thing. We're told that after the downfall of Númenor, this family was given the title of Prince of Belfalas by Elendil, and their land, Dor en Ernil, became one of Gondor's primary fiefs. They controlled an important section of the coast that was near to the Ethir Anduin, and their land also represented the westernmost major settlement of the Númenóreans. The lands inland and to the west were largely controlled by independent or even hostile middlemen who were gradually brought into Gondor's fold over the course of the Third Age. Unfortunately, the history of the Princes of Belfalas throughout much of the Third Age is largely unknown. Owing to the coastal nature of Belfalas, it's likely that the princes were quite powerful during the reigns of Gondor's 4 ship kings. We're unsure who the princes sided with during the Kinstrife. As a naval province, it's possible they sided with Castamir, but then, as loyalists to the line of Elendil, they may have also sided with the rightful king Eldacar. Regardless, the Princes of Belfalas remained in power following the Kinstrife, and along with the city of Pelargir, became incredibly important in the fight against the rebel realm in Umbar and the later Corsairs. Our first named prince appears in the year 1944. He is called Adrihil, the Prince of Dol Amroth, but as the land was not called Dol Amroth at this time, this is anachronistic. Instead, he would have also been called the Prince of Belfalas. When King Ondahur marched forth to meet the Wainrider Easterlings on Dagorlad, Adrihil is said to have been in command of the left flank of the army. Fortunately for Adrihil, when the disaster of the Morannon occurred, resulting in the deaths of King Ondahur and both of his sons, the left flank still wasn't in position. Minotaur, Ondahur's nephew and commander of the right flank, sent word for Adrihil to retreat into Ithilien, which Adrihil did. His fate is unknown, but he presumably survived the battle. You're probably wondering how then that the Princes of Belfalas became the Princes of Dol Amroth. Well, the origins of this actually begin in Moria, where the dwarves awoke the Balrog in 1980. The dwarves abandoned the city the following year, but it wasn't just dwarves who fled. Fearing what had been awoken in Moria, many elves of Lothlorien also fled south. Amongst them were King Amroth of Lothlorien and his lover-to-be Nimrodel. As the story goes, the company was separated as they passed through the White Mountains. Nimrodel's fate was unknown, and Amroth himself soon drowned in the Bay of Belfalas when a storm ripped his ship from its moorings and he attempted to swim back ashore. According to legend, which was seemingly later confirmed by Legolas, a man named Imrazor the Númenórean encountered Mithrelas, one of Nimrodel's handmaidens. She would bear him a son, Galador, in 2004, and a daughter, Gilmith, a short time later. After the birth of Gilmith, Mithrelas fled into the night and was never seen again. We don't know why Imrahil was called the Númenórean, but he seems to have been either the son or grandson of Adrihil, Prince of Belfalas, and at this time, he was either the Prince of Belfalas himself or was the heir. But when Imrahil died in 2076, aged 126, proof of the family's Númenórean heritage, his son, Galador, seems to have decided that a brand change was in order, possibly due to his half-elven heritage. The family's castle and city was renamed to Dol Amroth, the Hill of Amroth, in honour of the drowned elven king, and instead of being called the Princes of Belfalas, they would now be called the Princes of Dol Amroth, and the family would become known as the House of Dol Amroth. So even though Galador was just one in a very long line of princes who had ruled the region for millennia, he would become known as the first Prince of Dol Amroth. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the princes who followed Galador, probably due to the uneventful nature of the Watchful Peace, which was ongoing at the time. Galador died in 2129, aged 125, after ruling for 53 years. His descendants over the next few centuries shared similar lifespans, on occasions even outliving their contemporary stewards, possibly due to their higher degree of elven blood. Their exact ages being 143, 134, 127, 123, 126, 134, and 125. It's the unnamed 9th Prince of Dol Amroth who is the next to appear in our narrative. He is present at the Oath of Eorl and Cirion, which takes place at Elendil's tomb and signifies the founding of Rohan. Following the 9th Prince, much like with the stewards, their lifespans began to drop on average. The 9th Prince lived to 122, but he was the last to pass 120. His descendants reached 119, 118, 114, 113, and 106. Unfortunately, not all Princes of Dol Amroth got to reach their full lifespan. The Corsairs of Umbar became more active around this time, and Dol Amroth was one of their chief foes. The unnamed 15th Prince fell in battle against them, aged just 75, having ruled for a mere 13 years. His son, the 16th Prince, was also slain in battle, although we're not told if it was against the Corsairs. He was killed at 90, having ruled a much longer 53 years. They were the only princes to die in battle. The unnamed 17th and 18th princes enjoyed their full reigns, and still enjoyed longer lifespans with 113 and 114. Following them, we actually get our first named prince since Galador himself, the 19th prince, Aglahad. Although we know nothing of Aglahad himself, we know that during his time, some members of the House of Dol Amroth moved to the land of Lossarnach. We know this because Morwen Steelsheen, the future wife of King Thengel of Rohan and mother of Theoden, was a descendant of the Princes of Dol Amroth, and although she was born in Lossarnach, her father was the one who moved from Dol Amroth. Following Aglahad was Angelamir. Like his father, we know little about him and his reign may have been uneventful. He died in 2977, aged 111, having reigned for 45 years. He was succeeded by his son Adrihil. If that name sounds familiar, well, there was already a Prince of Belfalas called that name, but also he was the father of the future Prince Imrahil, as well as two elder daughters, Ivrinniel and Finduilas, who would become the wife of Denethor. Finduilas would move to Minas Tirith to live alongside Denethor and would bear him two sons, Boromir in 2978 and Faramir in 2983. Unfortunately, the move to Minas Tirith, away from the sea which Finduilas loved, and closer to the shadow of Mordor, resulted in her health rapidly declining, and she died in 2988, aged only 38. Back in Dol Amroth, Adrihil died relatively young for one of the princes, aged just 93, showing the gradual, inevitable waning of the Dunedain. Thus, Imrahil, known as the Fair, became the 22nd Prince of Dol Amroth. Although we know little of his reign, he was described by Legolas as a fair lord and a great captain of men. He had three sons, Elthir, Erkirion, and Amrathos, and one daughter, Lethiriel. Although he was extremely loyal to Denethor, he was also a great supporter of his nephew, Faramir. Imrahil would display his loyalty and strength during the War of the Ring, aged 64 at the time. He rode to the defense of Minas Tirith with 700 men-at-arms, including a company of the elite Swan Knights of Dol Amroth. Imrahil would lead the sortie that saved Faramir outside the walls of Minas Tirith, and he and his Swan Knights were the city's most staunch defenders, rallying soldiers wherever they went. When the Battle of Pelennor Fields was joined, Imrahil, alongside several other Gondorian lords, led the defenders forth from the city to aid the Rohirrim. Although many others perished, Imrahil survived the battle unscathed, and was partly responsible for the survival of both Faramir and Éowyn. The former, he urged Aragorn to go into the city to heal, and the latter, he noticed she was still alive when others thought she was dead, and also sent her into the city to be healed. Imrahil was then technically the ruler of Gondor when it was discovered that Denethor was dead, as Faramir was incapacitated. However, he deferred that leadership to Gandalf and Aragorn, and although Aragorn had not yet claimed the title of king, Imrahil once again demonstrated his loyalty by saying that he still considered him his liege lord. When the host of the West was being assembled, it was Imrahil that suggested that Minas Tirith still be defended. Imrahil then participated in the Battle of the Black Gate, and once again survived the battle. Following the War of the Ring, Imrahil would remain one of King Elessar's closest advisors and most prominent commanders. He also became close with King Éomer of Rohan when he accompanied the funeral procession of King Theoden back to Edoras. As a result, 2 years later, Éomer married Lithiriel, Imrahil's daughter, joining the House of Eorl and the House of Dol Amroth yet again, although this time in the princely line itself. We don't know what became of Dol Amroth in the Fourth Age beyond Imrahil and his next few descendants. Presumably, alongside the newly inhabited princedom of Ithilien, it would remain one of the most important and powerful fiefs in Gondor. If Gondor wished to reclaim power over the lands to the south in Harad, one might expect that Dol Amroth would need to play a major role in that. Rather incredibly, despite being born before Imrahil, Aragorn as King Elessar outlived the prince and both of his next successors. Imrahil himself would live until 34 of the Fourth Age, dying at the age of 100. Elfir succeeded his father, living until 67, dying aged 101. His son, Althros, would succeed him, dying in 95, aged 99. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I think the history of Dol Amroth is fairly underrated, especially when you consider the fact that the family that ruled there existed for over 5,000 years as an entity separate to the Lords of Andúnier and then the line of Elendil. Cheers, farewell, and remember, if you want to be a good person, be like Prince Imrahil.